I found the Amazon package sitting on my doorstep in Scottsdale, Arizona, already opened, the tape sliced clean through with what looked like a box cutter. My stomach dropped as I picked up the cardboard box, peering inside to find my new wireless earbuds still there, but the packaging had clearly been disturbed. Someone had gone through my mail, and I had a pretty good idea who. Her name was Patricia Henderson, the HOA president of our Desert Springs community, and she'd been a thorn in my side since I moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago. The woman was in her mid-50s, with that classic, "I need to speak to the manager" haircut, bleached blonde and razor sharp. She wore those oversized sunglasses even indoors and carried a clipboard everywhere like it was a weapon. "I'm Yusuf Zimmerman, 32 years old, and I work from home as a software developer. When I bought this 3-bedroom house in this gated community, I thought I was making a smart investment. The neighborhood looked perfect online, with its desert landscaping, community pool, and well-maintained streets. What the listing didn't mention was Patricia Henderson and her reign of terror over every homeowner in a half-mile radius. Standing on my porch that Tuesday morning in March, I turned the package over in my hands, examining the damage. The shipping label was addressed to me, no question about it. But someone had definitely opened it before I got to it. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the torn packaging, the opened box, everything. My neighbor, Gerald, was watering his front yard cactus garden and noticed me standing there. He was a retired accountant in his 70s, one of the few people in the neighborhood who would actually talk to me about Patricia's behavior. "Let me guess," he called over. "Your package came pre-opened." I walked over to his property line, still holding the box. "Yeah." "This is getting ridiculous, Gerald. Has this happened to you?" He shut off his hose and wiped his hands on his jeans. "3 times last year. I complained to the HOA board, but Patricia insisted it must have been damaged during shipping. She claimed she never touched anyone's mail." "That's a federal crime," I said flatly. "Opening someone else's mail is a felony." Gerald nodded slowly, glancing around as if Patricia might be lurking behind a saguaro cactus. "I know. But proving she did it is another matter. She's careful, Yusuf. Very careful." I thanked Gerald and went back inside my house, my mind racing. This wasn't the first issue I'd had with Patricia. 2 months ago, she'd sent me a violation notice because my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. Last month, she tried to fine me $200 because my front door wreath was not in compliance with community aesthetic standards. The wreath was a simple desert arrangement my sister had given me as a housewarming gift, but opening my mail, that crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I set up my laptop at the kitchen table and started researching. The federal statute was clear. 18 U.S. Code Section 1702 made it illegal to take, hide, or destroy mail that belonged to someone else. The penalties could include fines and up to 5 years in prison. This wasn't some petty HOA power trip anymore. This was serious. My phone buzzed with a text from my girlfriend, Laura Simmons. She was a paralegal at a firm downtown and had heard plenty of my Patricia stories over the past few months. "How's your morning?" her text read. "Patricia opened my Amazon package," I typed back. "I've got photos. Pretty sure this is a federal crime." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Do not throw away that package. That's evidence. I'm calling you on my lunch break." I spent the rest of the morning working on code for a client project, but my mind kept drifting back to the package sitting on my kitchen counter. Around noon, Laura called. "Okay, so I did some quick research," she said without preamble. "Opening mail that's not yours is absolutely a federal offense. You need to document everything and report it to the postal inspector." The postal inspector, I asked. Yeah, they're like federal agents for the mail system. They investigate mail fraud, mail theft, all of that. If Patricia has been opening mail, they'll take it seriously. She paused. But Yusuf, you need to be really sure about this. Making a false accusation against someone could backfire. I'm sure, I said, looking at the open package. The question is how to prove she's the one doing it. Security cameras, Laura said immediately. Do you have any pointed at your front door? I grimaced. No, I've been meaning to install some, but I haven't gotten around to it. Well, now's the time. Get some cameras up today if you can. If she's been doing this for years, like Gerald suggested, she's probably comfortable. She might not even realize she's being watched. Laura's voice took on that focused tone she got when she was problem-solving. In the meantime, file a report with the postal inspector. They have an online form. Include your photos and a detailed statement. After we hung up, I immediately ordered a set of wireless security cameras with express shipping. Then I sat down and filled out the online complaint form for the United States Postal Inspection Service. I included all the photos I'd taken, my account of finding the opened package, and mentioned that my neighbor had experienced similar incidents. The next day, I installed 2 cameras. One was positioned to capture my entire front porch and driveway, with a clear view of where packages would be delivered. The other covered my mailbox at the curb. Both cameras had motion detection, night vision, and uploaded footage directly to cloud storage. I wasn't taking any chances. For the next week, nothing unusual happened. My mail arrived normally, no packages came, and Patricia seemed to be keeping her distance. I started to wonder if maybe she'd somehow figured out I was onto her, but that seemed paranoid. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I got a notification on my phone. Motion detected at the front door. I was in a meeting with a client via video call, so I couldn't check it immediately. When the meeting ended 45 minutes later, I pulled up the security app. The footage made my blood run cold. At 2:17 p.m., the mail carrier had delivered a small package to my front door. At 2:31 p.m., Patricia Henderson walked up my driveway, looked around carefully, picked up the package, and walked away with it. She didn't even try to hide what she was doing. She just took it like she had every right to be there. I immediately scrubbed forward in the timeline. At 3:04 p.m., Patricia returned and placed the package back on my porch, but the way she set it down, I could tell it had been opened. The tape was different, hastily reapplied. I saved the video clips to 3 different locations, including emailing them to myself and Laura. Then I went outside to check the package. Sure enough, it had been opened and clumsily resealed. Inside was a book I'd ordered, a technical manual for work. Nothing valuable or personal, but that wasn't the point. When I called Laura, she answered on the first ring. Please tell me you got her on camera. I got her on camera, I said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Clear as day. She took the package, brought it back 40 minutes later, and it had been opened. Send me everything. I'm going to talk to one of the partners at my firm who handles criminal cases. Yusuf, this is really serious. She's committed a federal crime and you have evidence. That evening, I received an email from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. An inspector named Robert Morrison was assigned to my case and wanted to schedule a phone call to discuss the matter. I replied immediately, suggesting the next morning. Inspector Morrison called at exactly 9 a.m. His voice was professional, measured, the kind of tone that suggested he'd dealt with thousands of cases just like this. Mr. Zimmerman, I've reviewed your initial complaint and the photos you submitted. Can you walk me through what's been happening? I explained everything, from finding the open package the previous week to the security footage I'd captured yesterday. When I mentioned I had video evidence of Patricia taking and returning my mail, his tone shifted slightly. "You have video of the suspect removing mail from your property and returning it opened?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Clear footage with timestamps. I can send it to you immediately." "Please do. Send it to the email address I'm about to give you and include any other documentation you have. I'm also going to need you to tell me if there are any other residents in your community who might have experienced similar issues." I mentioned Gerald and explained that he'd had several packages arrive already opened last year. Inspector Morrison took down Gerald's information and said he'd be in contact with both of us soon. After the call, I walked over to Gerald's house. He was in his garage, organizing his tool bench, and looked surprised to see me. "I've got Patricia on camera opening my mail," I said without preamble. "And I've filed a report with the postal inspector. He's going to want to talk to you about your experiences last year." Gerald's eyes widened. He set down the wrench he'd been holding and motioned me inside the garage. "You're serious? You actually caught her?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the footage. We watched as Patricia casually strolled up to my house, took the package, and later returned it. "That woman," Gerald muttered, shaking his head. "I knew she was doing it, but I never could prove it." "Last year, I had a package with some medication arrive opened. Nothing was missing, but someone had definitely gone through it. When I brought it up at an HOA meeting, Patricia acted offended that I would even suggest such a thing." "The inspector wants to talk to you," I said. "Would you be willing to give a statement?" Gerald nodded firmly. "Absolutely. It's about time someone held her accountable." Over the next few days, Inspector Morrison worked quickly. He called Gerald and took his statement. He also reached out to several other residents in the community, asking if they'd experienced similar issues with their mail. Apparently, I'd opened up a floodgate. Laura came over that Saturday evening with takeout from our favorite Thai place. We sat at my kitchen table, eating pad Thai and discussing the situation. "So I talked to Martin, one of the senior partners at my firm," she said between bites. "He said that if the postal inspector finds enough evidence, they'll likely turn it over to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution. Mail theft and tampering are taken very seriously." "Good," I said, "because this isn't just about me anymore. Gerald told me that at least 4 other people in the neighborhood have had similar issues. Patricia's been doing this for who knows how long." Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know you're angry and you have every right to be. Just make sure you let the investigators do their job. Don't confront Patricia or do anything that could compromise the case." "I won't," I promised. "I just want this documented and handled properly." The following Tuesday, I got another notification from my security camera. Patricia was at my front door again, but this time there was no package. She was taping a notice to my door. I watched the live feed as she finished, looked around, and walked back to her own house 3 doors down. I waited until she was gone before going outside to see what she'd left. It was an HOA violation notice, printed on the official Desert Springs letterhead. "Dear resident," it began in that passive-aggressive formal tone I'd come to recognize as Patricia's signature style. "It has come to the attention of the HOA board that you have installed security cameras on your property without prior approval. Per Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines, all exterior modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation. You have 14 days to remove the cameras or submit a formal request for approval. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $100 per day." I laughed out loud standing on my porch. The timing was almost too perfect. Patricia had noticed the cameras and was now trying to force me to take them down. The fact that those cameras had captured her committing a federal crime probably hadn't occurred to her yet. I took a photo of the notice and texted it to Laura with the caption, "She's trying to make me remove the cameras." Her response came within seconds. "Of course she is. Don't remove them. I'll bet anything that section of the HOA rules isn't even enforceable for security cameras." That evening, I dug out my copy of the HOA guidelines, all 78 pages of dense legalese that I'd barely glanced at when I bought the house. I found Section 7.3, which dealt with exterior modifications. It covered things like paint colors, landscaping changes, and structural additions. Security cameras were mentioned, but only in the context of requiring that they be discreetly placed and not visible from the street. My cameras were small, black, and mounted under the eaves of my porch. You'd have to be specifically looking for them to notice them. They certainly weren't visible from the street. Patricia's violation notice was completely unfounded. I drafted a response letter, keeping my tone professional and factual. I cited the specific language in the HOA guidelines, included photos showing that my cameras were discreetly mounted, and noted that security cameras were a reasonable measure to protect my property. I didn't mention that they'd captured her committing crimes. That wasn't something I wanted to tip my hand about yet. I emailed my response to the HOA board, not just Patricia, and CC'd Laura for good measure. Within an hour, I got a terse reply from Patricia. "Your interpretation of the guidelines is incorrect. The Architectural Review Committee will review your case at next month's meeting." Laura called me that night, laughing. "She's scrambling. She knows those cameras caught something, but she doesn't know what yet. She's trying to intimidate you into taking them down." "Well, it's not working," I said, "and I'm going to make sure those cameras stay right where they are." The next morning, Inspector Morrison called again. "Mr. Zimmerman, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've spoken with 6 residents in your community who have reported similar incidents with their mail. Based on the evidence you provided and the additional statements we've gathered, we have probable cause to believe Miss Henderson has been tampering with mail for at least 2 years. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're going to execute a search warrant on her residence. Given the nature of the alleged crimes, we need to see if she's retained any mail or packages that don't belong to her. I wanted to give you a heads up because this will likely cause some disruption in your community." "When is this happening?" "Tomorrow morning, around 8 a.m. We'll have several agents on site, as well as local law enforcement for support. I'd appreciate it if you could keep this information confidential until after the warrant is executed." I agreed, though I immediately called Laura to tell her what was happening. She was stunned. "They're raiding her house." "Yusuf, this is bigger than I thought. 6 people," I said. "She's been doing this to at least 6 people that they know of, probably more. Who knows what they'll find when they search her place?" That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what might happen the next morning, wondering what evidence the investigators would uncover. Patricia had always struck me as controlling and intrusive, but the scale of what she'd been doing was shocking. At 7:30 the next morning, I made coffee and positioned myself near my front window, which had a decent view of Patricia's house. At exactly 8 a.m., 3 unmarked SUVs pulled up in front of her property. Men and women in windbreakers marked Postal Inspector, and police got out and approached the front door. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Patricia answer the door in her bathrobe, her face going pale as they presented what must have been the search warrant. She was gesturing animatedly, clearly upset, but the investigators pushed past her into the house. For the next 3 hours, I watched as they carried out boxes of evidence. Actual boxes, at least a dozen of them, loaded into the vehicles. Neighbors started coming out of their houses, standing in clusters on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing. Gerald came over and knocked on my door. "Did you know about this?" he asked when I let him in. "The postal inspector called me yesterday to give me a heads up. They found enough evidence to get a search warrant." We stood by my window, watching the scene unfold. Patricia was now standing on her front lawn, still in her bathrobe, talking on her phone. She looked furious and terrified at the same time. "What do you think they found?" Gerald asked. "I don't know, but they've carried out a lot of boxes, more than I expected." Around 11 a.m., Inspector Morrison himself came to my door. He was a tall man in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd been doing this job for decades. "Mr. Zimmerman, do you have a few minutes to talk?" I invited him in, and we sat at my kitchen table. He pulled out a notepad but didn't open it immediately. "I wanted to thank you for bringing this case to our attention," he began. "What we found in Miss Henderson's residence was more extensive than we anticipated. She had a dedicated room in her house, essentially an office, where she'd been cataloging information about every resident in this community. We found opened mail, photographs of mail and packages, detailed notes about delivery times and patterns, even copies of personal documents that she'd apparently photographed before returning mail to its rightful owners." My mouth fell open. She was documenting all of this. It appears Miss Henderson had become obsessed with monitoring the activities of everyone in this HOA. We found mail and packages dating back at least 3 years. Some items were never returned to their owners. We're going to need to sort through everything and contact the victims." "How many people are we talking about?" Inspector Morrison's expression was grim. "Based on what we found, at least 23 residents in this community had their mail tampered with. Some of them have moved away, so we'll need to track them down. This is one of the most extensive cases of mail theft I've handled in my career." I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. 23 people, 3 years. Patricia had been systematically violating the privacy and federal rights of nearly everyone in the neighborhood, and no one had been able to stop her until now. "What happens to her now?" I asked. "She'll be charged with multiple federal counts of mail theft and tampering. Given the number of victims and the duration of the crimes, she's looking at serious prison time if convicted. The U.S. Attorney's Office will handle the prosecution." He paused. "You may be called to testify at some point, given that your video evidence was crucial in obtaining the search warrant." "I'll do whatever I need to do," I said. After Inspector Morrison left, I called Laura and filled her in on everything. She was at work but stepped out of the office to take my call. 23 people, she repeated. "Yusuf, that's insane. What was she even doing with all that information?" "Apparently keeping files on everyone. Morrison said she was obsessed with monitoring the community." "That's not HOA president behavior, that's stalker behavior, criminal stalker behavior." Laura was quiet for a moment. "You know what this means, right? The HOA is going to have to elect a new board. Patricia's done." The news spread through Desert Springs like wildfire. By that afternoon, everyone knew that Patricia Henderson had been caught stealing mail and that federal investigators had raided her home. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from neighbors I barely knew, asking if I had more information, thanking me for reporting it, sharing their own stories of suspicious incidents with their mail. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Jennifer who lived on the other side of the community. 3 years ago, my passport never arrived in the mail. I had to pay to get a replacement and almost missed an international trip. I always suspected someone took it, but I could never prove it. Thank you for finally getting evidence against Patricia. Another neighbor, Michael, texted. Last year, my wife's credit card was stolen from our mail. We had to deal with identity theft issues for months. We thought it was random theft, but now I'm wondering if Patricia was involved. The scope of Patricia's crimes was becoming clearer, and it was far worse than simple nosiness. She'd caused real harm to people, financial losses, missed opportunities, violated their most personal information. This wasn't just about an overzealous HOA president anymore. This was about a criminal who'd used her position of trust to prey on her neighbors. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The 3 other board members, none of whom had been implicated in Patricia's activities, sent out an email asking all residents to attend a meeting at the community clubhouse. Laura came with me for moral support. The clubhouse was packed. Every chair was filled and people lined the walls. The mood was tense, angry but also relieved. The board members sat at a table in front, looking uncomfortable and exhausted. Richard, the vice president, called the meeting to order. He was a middle-aged man who worked in real estate and had always seemed reasonable during the few interactions I'd had with him. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. "I'm sure you're all aware by now of the situation involving Patricia Henderson. We want to address this directly and transparently. First, let me be clear. The other board members had no knowledge of Patricia's illegal activities. We are as shocked and disturbed as all of you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "How could you not know?" Richard held up his hand. "That's a fair question. Looking back, there were signs we should have paid more attention to. Patricia was very controlling about certain aspects of HOA business, particularly anything involving mail delivery or package security. She often insisted on being the one to handle complaints about missing mail. We trusted her judgment as president, and that was a mistake. We should have been more vigilant." Another board member, Sandra, spoke up. She was a retired teacher in her 60s. "Effective immediately, Patricia Henderson has been removed from her position as HOA president and from the board entirely. We will be holding an emergency election for a new president within the next 30 days. In the meantime, Richard will serve as interim president. What about legal action?" Someone called out, "Is the HOA going to be held responsible for what Patricia did?" Richard looked pained. "We've consulted with our attorney. The HOA as an organization may face civil liability for Patricia's actions, even though we weren't aware of them. We're working to understand the full scope of that liability. We encourage anyone who believes they were harmed by Patricia's actions to document their experiences and cooperate with the federal investigation." I raised my hand, and Richard nodded at me. I stood up so everyone could hear me clearly. "My name is Yusuf Zimmerman. I'm the one who reported Patricia to the postal inspector after catching her on my security cameras opening my mail. I want everyone to know that the investigators take this very seriously. If you've had any issues with missing or tampered mail, even if it was months or years ago, please contact the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. They're working to identify all the victims." The room erupted in conversation. Several people came up to me after the meeting, thanking me, sharing their stories, asking for details about how to file reports. Gerald stood beside me, helping field questions. One elderly woman, her eyes watery with emotion, grabbed my hand. She opened a letter from my daughter last Christmas. It had photos of my grandchildren. I never got those photos. Patricia must have taken them. My chest tightened with anger. "I'm so sorry. Please tell the investigators they found a lot of material in her house. Your photos might still be there." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation continued to unfold. Inspector Morrison contacted me several more times, asking follow-up questions and keeping me informed of the progress. The U.S. Attorney's Office had charged Patricia with 47 federal counts of mail theft and tampering. More victims kept coming forward as the news spread. The HOA held the emergency election, and Richard was officially voted in as president. One of his first acts was to pass a resolution explicitly stating that security cameras were permitted on all properties without prior approval, as long as they complied with basic aesthetic guidelines. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Laura and I were having dinner at my place one evening when my phone rang. It was Inspector Morrison. "Mr. Zimmerman, I wanted to update you on the case. Patricia Henderson's attorney has approached the U.S. Attorney about a plea deal. Given the overwhelming evidence against her, they're trying to avoid a trial." "What kind of plea deal?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker so Laura could hear. "They're offering to plead guilty to 20 counts in exchange for dropping the other charges. The recommended sentence would be 36 months in federal prison, followed by supervised release. The U.S. Attorney is considering it because it would save the expense and time of a trial, and it would still result in significant prison time for Miss Henderson." "What do you think?" I asked. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Personally, I think she should face all 47 counts. What she did was systematic and deliberate over a period of years. But I also understand the practical realities of the legal system. Trials are expensive and time-consuming, and there's always a risk, however small, that something could go wrong. A plea deal guarantees a conviction and prison time. Will the victims have any say in this? There will be a hearing where victims can provide impact statements. You'll be notified when that's scheduled. I'd encourage you and anyone else who was affected to attend and make your voices heard." After Morrison hung up, Laura and I sat in silence for a while. 3 years in federal prison sounded like a significant sentence, but I couldn't help wondering if it was enough for the damage Patricia had caused. "What are you thinking?" Laura asked gently. "I'm thinking about that woman at the HOA meeting, the one who never got photos of her grandchildren. About the guy whose passport was stolen. About all the people whose private information Patricia violated." I shook my head. 3 years seems like a long time, but is it really enough? Laura reached across the table and took my hand. "It's not about revenge, Yusuf. It's about justice and making sure she can't hurt anyone else. 3 years in federal prison is serious. It will be on her record permanently. She'll lose her house, probably declare bankruptcy from the legal fees and restitution. Her life as she knew it is over." "I know," I said. "And I do think justice is being served. It just makes me angry that she got away with it for so long." The victim impact hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late April at the federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix. I took the day off work, and Laura came with me. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. At least 15 people from Desert Springs were there, all of us victims of Patricia's crimes in one way or another. Patricia sat at the defense table with her attorney, a sharp-dressed man who looked like he cost more per hour than most people made in a week. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. She'd lost weight, and her signature blonde hair had grown out, showing gray roots. She didn't look at any of us. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Carol Martinez, called the hearing to order. The prosecutor, an assistant U.S. attorney named David Chen, outlined the plea agreement and the charges Patricia was pleading guilty to. Then it was time for victim impact statements. Gerald went first. He walked slowly to the podium, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. "Your Honor, I'm 73 years old. I moved to Desert Springs 5 years ago after my wife passed away, looking for a peaceful place to spend my retirement. Patricia Henderson violated that peace and that trust. She opened my mail, including packages containing prescription medications. The stress of dealing with missing mail and wondering if my personal information was being stolen affected my health. I developed anxiety that required treatment. I just want the court to know that her actions had real consequences for real people. One by one, others stood up and shared their stories. The woman who'd lost her passport, a young couple whose wedding invitations had been opened and delayed, causing confusion for their guests. A man whose medical records had been photographed by Patricia, violating his privacy in the most intimate way. When it was my turn, I approached the podium with my prepared statement in hand, but when I stood there looking at Patricia, I decided to speak from the heart instead. Your Honor, my name is Yusuf Zimmerman. I was one of the more recent victims of Patricia Henderson's crimes. When I bought my home in Desert Springs, I was excited to be part of a community. Instead, I found myself dealing with constant harassment disguised as HOA enforcement. When I discovered that Patricia was opening my mail, I was shocked and angry, but I was also determined to stop her from hurting anyone else. I paused, gathering my thoughts. What bothers me most isn't what she did to me. It's the systematic way she violated the trust and privacy of dozens of people over multiple years. She used her position as HOA president, a position where she was supposed to be serving her neighbors, to prey on those same neighbors. She didn't just commit crimes, she betrayed an entire community. I hope the court will ensure that she faces appropriate consequences for that betrayal, and that she's never in a position to abuse people's trust again. When I sat back down, Laura squeezed my arm supportively. Patricia still hadn't looked up, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. Judge Martinez asked Patricia to stand. Her attorney helped her up, and for the first time she looked directly at the judge. Miss Henderson, you've heard the impact statements from your victims. Do you have anything to say before I decide whether to accept this plea agreement? Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix what I did, but I am sorry. I don't know why I did it. I just wanted to know what was happening in the neighborhood. I wanted to make sure everything was under control. It became an obsession and I couldn't stop. I'm sorry. Her apology felt hollow to me, but Judge Martinez listened impassively. Then she spoke, her voice firm and clear. Miss Henderson, what you did was not only illegal but a profound violation of your neighbor's trust and privacy. You held a position of responsibility in your community, and you abused that position systematically and deliberately for years. The victims who spoke here today represent only a fraction of the people you harmed. Some were financially damaged. Some suffered emotional distress. All had their fundamental right to privacy violated. The judge paused, letting her words sink in. However, I also recognize that you've accepted responsibility by pleading guilty, and that a trial would be costly and time-consuming for the victims. I'm going to accept the plea agreement with one modification. In addition to the 36 months of imprisonment, you will serve 3 years of supervised release, during which you are prohibited from holding any position in any homeowners association or similar organization. You will also pay restitution to all identified victims for any documented financial losses resulting from your actions. Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder. Sentencing is scheduled for 6 weeks from today, Judge Martinez continued. Until then, you will remain free on bond. Do not leave the state of Arizona and comply with all conditions of your release. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down and it was over. People around me started talking, some crying, some looking relieved. Laura and I made our way out of the courtroom and into the bright Phoenix sunshine. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Honestly, relieved. It's finally done. She's going to prison and she can't hurt anyone else." We walked to a coffee shop near the courthouse and sat outside, watching the city move around us. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors who hadn't been able to attend the hearing, asking how it went. I sent a group text summarizing what had happened and Judge Martinez's ruling. Gerald texted back immediately. "Justice served. Thank you for having the courage to stand up to her." That evening, Laura and I drove back to Scottsdale. As we pulled into Desert Springs, the neighborhood looked peaceful, almost serene in the golden hour light. Kids were playing in yards, people were walking dogs. The community pool was full of families cooling off from the warm spring day. "It looks different now," Laura said, reading my thoughts. "It feels different," I agreed. "Like a weight has been lifted." We parked at my house and went inside. I'd planned to make dinner, but we ended up ordering pizza and sitting on my back patio, watching the sun set over the desert. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board under Richard's leadership was transparent and reasonable. They held regular meetings, communicated clearly about community issues, and treated residents with respect. It was everything an HOA should be. I got to know more of my neighbors, bonding over our shared experience of surviving Patricia's regime. Gerald became a close friend, often coming over for dinner or joining Laura and me for weekend hikes in the nearby mountains. The neighborhood genuinely started to feel like a community. Inspector Morrison called one more time in early May to let me know that Patricia's sentencing had been completed. She'd been sentenced to exactly what the plea deal specified: 36 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and restitution totaling over $18,000 to various victims. She'd begin serving her sentence in 2 weeks at a minimum security federal facility. "I wanted to thank you again, Mr. Zimmerman," Morrison said. "Without your security cameras and your willingness to come forward, we never would have been able to build this case. You did your community and the Postal Service a real service." "I just did what needed to be done," I said. "But thank you for taking it seriously and following through." "That's our job," he replied, "and we don't take male crimes lightly, never have, never will." After that call, I sat on my porch for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. It had been 2 months since I'd found that first opened package. 2 months that had completely transformed my neighborhood and exposed Patricia's years of criminal behavior. Laura came over after work that evening with her overnight bag. She'd been staying at my place more and more often, and we'd started talking seriously about her moving in permanently. "So it's really over," she said, settling onto the couch beside me. "Patricia's going to prison." "It's really over," I confirmed. 3 years. Plus, she'll never be allowed to be part of an HOA board again. Good. She should never have been in that position in the first place. Laura curled up against my side. "I'm proud of you, you know, for standing up to her, for getting evidence, for following through even when it was difficult. I'm just glad it's done, and I'm glad we can actually enjoy living here now." The following weekend, the HOA organized a community barbecue at the pool. It was Richard's idea, a way to help everyone heal and move forward together. Nearly every household showed up, bringing food and drinks, kids splashing in the pool, adults mingling and actually getting to know each other without the cloud of Patricia's surveillance hanging over us. Gerald manned the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs with the expertise of someone who'd done this at 1,000 family gatherings. I helped him while Laura chatted with some of the other women by the pool. You know, Gerald said, not looking up from the grill, I've lived in a lot of places over the years, raised my family in 3 different states. This is the first time I've ever seen a community come together like this after something so divisive. What do you mean? I asked. Usually, when there's a scandal or a crime involving someone in the neighborhood, people take sides. They fight about who knew what and when. But everyone here recognizes that Patricia was the problem, not the HOA, not the community. We're all moving forward together. He flipped a burger with a satisfied nod. That's rare, Yusuf. That's special. I looked around at the scene, kids laughing in the pool, neighbors sharing food and stories, the warm Arizona evening settling over us. Gerald was right. This was special. We'd been through something difficult, but we'd come out the other side stronger. Laura walked over and slipped her hand into mine. Having fun? Yeah, I said, meaning it completely. I really am. As the sun set and the string lights around the pool area came on, someone suggested playing music. Soon, classic rock was flowing from a portable speaker, and a few people even started dancing. The atmosphere was light, joyful, everything that a community gathering should be. Richard clinked a bottle against his glass to get everyone's attention. The music lowered, and people turned to listen. I just want to say a few words, he began. These past couple months have been challenging for all of us. We've had to confront some difficult truths about our community and someone we trusted. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge Yusuf Zimmerman. All eyes turned to me and I felt my face flush. Yusuf, you did something incredibly brave. You could have let it go, written it off as a one-time thing, or worried about causing trouble. Instead, you stood up, gathered evidence, and reported a crime. Because of your actions, a systematic pattern of criminal behavior was stopped, and dozens of victims got justice. On behalf of the entire community, thank you. Everyone applauded. Some people were actually wiping away tears. Gerald clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to make me stumble forward slightly. Speech, someone called out. I waved my hands. No speech needed. I just did what anyone would do. But most people wouldn't. A woman named Susan spoke up. She was one of the victims who discovered that Patricia had opened letters from her son deployed overseas. Most people would have been too afraid or too unsure. You followed through. That matters. I took a breath, realizing they actually wanted to hear from me. Okay, just a few words then. When I moved here, I wanted to be part of a community. That's what I thought an HOA was supposed to be about. Neighbors looking out for each other, maintaining our homes, creating a place we're proud to live in. What Patricia did was the opposite of that. She violated our trust and our privacy. But look at us now. We're actually being the community we're supposed to be. That's not because of me. That's because of all of us choosing to move forward together. So, thank you all for making Desert Springs feel like home. More applause, and then someone cranked the music back up, and the party continued. Laura hugged me tight. That was perfect, she whispered in my ear. The party went until almost midnight, long past when these kinds of neighborhood events usually ended. People were reluctant to leave, savoring the connection and the sense that we'd turned a corner together. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued working from home, my security cameras still in place, but now mostly just recording the occasional delivery driver or neighborhood cat. Laura officially moved in at the end of May, bringing her furniture and books and making my house feel like our home. Gerald introduced me to his daughter when she came to visit from California. She thanked me personally for helping her father get justice after his mail had been violated. He was so stressed last year, she told me. He wouldn't talk about it much, but I could tell something was wrong. Knowing that person is being held accountable gives him peace. The restitution process took time, but eventually, checks started arriving for victims who documented financial losses. I received a check for $200 covering the value of some items Patricia had taken and never returned. A book, a replacement credit card fee, and the express shipping I'd paid for the security cameras. It wasn't about the money. It was about the acknowledgement that real harm had been done and needed to be addressed. By summer, Desert Springs had truly transformed. The new HOA board was functional and fair. Violation notices were rare and reasonable when they did occur. The community garden that had been proposed but shot down by Patricia was approved and built, with residents volunteering their time to maintain it. Movie nights at the pool became a monthly tradition. One evening in late June, Laura and I were sitting on our back patio with Gerald, drinking iced tea and watching the stars come out. The desert sky was impossibly clear, the Milky Way visible as a ghostly band across the darkness. You ever wonder what Patricia's thinking right now? Gerald asked out of nowhere. I considered the question. Probably regretting her choices. Federal prison isn't pleasant, even minimum security. I hope she's getting help, Laura said quietly. What she did was criminal, and she deserved to be punished. But there was clearly something wrong with her, some obsession or control issue. I hope she's getting treatment for whatever that was. That's generous of you, Gerald observed. Laura shrugged. I work in law. I see a lot of cases where people do terrible things because of untreated mental health issues. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but understanding it might prevent it from happening again. If Patricia can get help and genuinely change, maybe when she gets out, she can live a normal life somewhere else. As long as it's not on an HOA board, I added, and we all laughed. Gerald raised his glass. To new beginnings and good neighbors. We clinked our glasses together, the ice tinkling in the warm night air. To new beginnings, Laura and I echoed. In August, I was contacted by a reporter from the Arizona Republic who was writing a story about HOA abuse and wanted to interview me about the Patricia Henderson case. I agreed, on the condition that the focus be on the importance of reporting crimes and the effectiveness of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, not on me personally. The article ran the following week with the headline, Scottsdale HOA President's Mail Theft Scheme Uncovered by Resident Security Camera. It was fair and well-researched, interviewing several victims and including comments from Inspector Morrison about the seriousness of mail crimes. The article mentioned the sentencing and the reforms the Desert Springs HOA had implemented afterward. For a few days, I got calls and emails from people in other communities sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were minor complaints about overzealous boards, but a few described situations that sounded potentially criminal. I referred those people to the postal inspector's office and encouraged them to document everything and report it through proper channels. One woman from Temp reached out to say that, after reading the article, she'd checked her security camera footage and discovered her HOA president was also opening her packages. She filed a report, and last I heard, that case was under investigation too. It made me realize that Patricia probably wasn't unique. She'd just gotten caught. As fall approached and the brutal Arizona summer heat finally started to break, Laura and I celebrated a year since I'd moved to Desert Springs. We threw a small dinner party at our house, inviting Gerald, Richard and his wife, and a few other neighbors we'd become close to, over grilled steaks and roasted vegetables. Richard shared that the HOA's finances were being audited as part of the cleanup from Patricia's tenure. We want to make sure she wasn't doing anything else inappropriate. So far, Everything looks clean financially, but we're being thorough." "That's smart," Laura said. "Once someone abuses a position of trust in one way, you have to check everything. That's what our lawyer said too." Richard took a sip of wine. "On a more positive note, we're going to have our first contested election for board positions next month. 5 people are running for 3 open seats. Actual democracy happening in an HOA. Who would have thought? That's how it should work," Gerald said. "People caring about their community enough to serve, and residents caring enough to actually vote." After dinner, as people were saying their goodbyes, Richard pulled me aside. "I wanted you to know something," he said quietly. "Before all this happened, I was actually thinking about moving. Patricia made living here so miserable with her constant rules and complaints. But now I love this place. What you did didn't just stop a criminal, you saved our community. I'll never forget that." I didn't quite know what to say, so I just shook his hand. "I'm glad you're staying." After everyone left, Laura and I cleaned up the kitchen together, moving in the easy rhythm of people who'd learned to share space comfortably. "This turned out pretty well, didn't it?" she said, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "What, the dinner party? Everything? The whole situation?" "It could have gone so many different ways. Patricia could have destroyed evidence or intimidated witnesses. The investigation could have stalled. The U.S. attorney could have decided not to prosecute, but everything worked out." I thought about that as I wiped down the counter. She was right. We'd gotten lucky in a lot of ways. Lucky that I'd installed cameras when I did. Lucky that other victims were willing to come forward. Lucky that Inspector Morrison was thorough and committed to seeing it through. "It worked out because people did the right thing," I said finally. From the postal inspector to the neighbors who gave statements to the judge who took it seriously. The system actually worked the way it's supposed to. "That's rare," Laura said. "You should be proud." A year later, in the fall of the following year, I got an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia Henderson, forwarded through Inspector Morrison's office. He'd called first to ask if I wanted to receive it, explaining that she'd written letters to several of her victims as part of some kind of restorative justice program at the prison. I wasn't sure I wanted to read it, but curiosity won out. Laura was beside me on the couch when I opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten on plain notebook paper, Patricia's handwriting small and precise. "Dear Mr. Zimmerman," it began. "I know that an apology is inadequate for what I did to you and the other residents of Desert Springs. I've spent the past year in prison thinking about my actions and trying to understand why I did what I did. I've been working with a therapist here who specializes in obsessive disorders, and I've been diagnosed with a severe form of obsessive-compulsive disorder that manifested as a need to control my environment. This is not an excuse. There is no excuse for violating your privacy and committing federal crimes, but I want you to know that I'm trying to understand myself and change. I will spend the rest of my life regretting what I did and the people I hurt. I hope that you and the others can find peace and healing. I will never be part of an HOA again, and I will never put myself in a position where I could abuse people's trust like I did. Again, I am deeply sorry. Patricia Henderson." I read the letter twice, then handed it to Laura. She read it silently, her expression neutral. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think she's saying the right things. Whether she means them or has actually changed, time will tell. But at least she's acknowledging what she did and trying to take responsibility." Laura folded the letter and handed it back to me. "Do you want to write back?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to tell Patricia exactly how much damage she'd caused, how many people she'd hurt. But another part of me felt like that would just be rehashing the past. "No," I decided. I said what I needed to say at the sentencing hearing. She's served half her sentence now and she'll be out eventually. If she's genuinely changed, good for her. If not, that's not my problem anymore. Laura nodded approvingly. Moving on is healthy. I filed the letter away in a folder with all the other documentation from the case. The photos of opened packages, copies of the violation notices Patricia had sent me, the security camera footage, Inspector Morrison's contact information. I didn't plan to look at any of it again, but I wanted it preserved, just in case. That winter, Desert Springs held a holiday party at the clubhouse, which had been renovated with funds from a community fundraiser. The space looked beautiful, decorated with lights and a huge Christmas tree. Almost every household attended, and the atmosphere was warm and festive. I found myself standing with Gerald near the punch bowl, watching kids run around while their parents chatted and laughed. "You know what I appreciate most about all this?" Gerald said, watching the scene. "It's not just that Patricia is gone. It's that we learned we can solve problems together. We learned that speaking up matters. If you hadn't reported what was happening, she'd still be out there opening mail and violating everyone's privacy. You showed everyone that one person can make a difference." "I just wish I'd caught on sooner," I admitted. "She was doing it for years before I moved in." "Don't do that," Gerald said firmly. "Don't take on guilt that isn't yours. Patricia made her choices. You stopped her when you could. That's all anyone can ask." Richard clinked a glass again, getting everyone's attention for a toast. "To our community," he said simply. "To the neighbors we've become and the home we've built together. May next year be even better." "To our community," everyone echoed, glasses raised. Laura found me in the crowd and wrapped her arm around my waist. "Happy?" she asked. I looked around at the scene, at Gerald laughing with Sandra from the HOA board, at the kids playing, at the decorations and the warmth and the genuine sense of community that filled the room. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." Patricia Henderson was released from federal prison after serving her full sentence in the spring 2 years after her conviction. I heard about it through Inspector Morrison, who kept in touch occasionally to update me on developments in mail theft cases. Patricia moved to New Mexico, away from Arizona entirely, and as far as anyone knew, she was working a regular job and keeping out of trouble. The restraining order that prohibited her from HOA involvement remained in effect permanently. Desert Springs continued to thrive. The community garden expanded. The pool got renovated. Property values actually increased as word spread that it was a well-managed, genuinely pleasant neighborhood. New families moved in, and the story of Patricia Henderson became a cautionary tale we'd share with newcomers. This is what can happen when one person abuses power, and this is how a community came together to stop it and heal. Laura and I got engaged that summer. I proposed on a hiking trail in the Superstition Mountains, and she said yes before I even finished asking the question. We planned a fall wedding, and Gerald insisted on giving a toast at the reception about how he'd watched our relationship grow stronger through adversity. At the wedding, surrounded by friends and neighbors from Desert Springs, I realized how much my life had changed since that day I'd found an open package on my doorstep. What could have been just a frustrating violation of privacy had turned into something much larger. A criminal investigation, a federal prosecution, and ultimately the transformation of an entire community. Standing there with Laura, our future stretching out ahead of us, I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd taken photos that first day. Grateful that I'd installed cameras and reported what I found. Grateful for Inspector Morrison's diligence, for Gerald's support, for Laura's steady guidance through the whole process. Grateful that justice, for once, had actually been served. The DJ played our first dance song and Laura and I moved onto the floor. As we swayed together, she whispered, "No regrets." Not a single one, I whispered back. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be, and it was. The opened mail that had started everything was long forgotten, replaced by the life Laura and I were building together in our home, in our community, surrounded by people we trusted and who trusted us in return. Patricia Henderson had tried to control and violate that trust, but in the end, she'd only made it stronger. The music played on and we danced into our future, the past finally where it belonged. Behind us, resolved and complete.